Okay.
Hi.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm good. Can you hear and see me okay?
I can. Can you hear and
Okay.
see me?
Yeah, great.
Yeah. Oh, good. Well, thanks for coming on today.
Thanks so much for having me, obviously.
Oh, sure. Can you hold up a copy of your book so everybody can see it? Beautiful. The Jane Austen Society. So it's so funny. I was recently on Anne Vogel's podcast, which is called What Should I Read Next? And your book was one of the ones that she was most excited about reading this summer. So
Yeah. I know it's been really great. She's been wonderfully supportive. I feel very blessed right now.
tell us what your book is about and what inspired you to write it?
My book is about eight extremely different people at the end of World War II who are all dealing with trauma and loss in different ways. And they bond over a sort of unknown shared love of Jane Austen that's sort of percolating amongst them and sort of either on their own or in little subgroups. And they decide to form a society to try and save the cottage where Jane Austen in real life had lived and worked or revised her six major works. So it's a very fictional account of something that actually did happen, though, during the war, which was the formation of the first real life Jane Austen Society.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so, what sparked your particular interest in this?
So I had a shattering experience, like Judith and you were just discussing, and my husband and I had opened up a little independent bookshop. And 4 months in, he was diagnosed with a very rare and terminal form of lung disease that's also genetic. And at the time, we were told that most people would pass away within 2 to 3 years. And we were a young family. We had a 14-year-old daughter. So I was also a career coach. I used to be a lawyer, and I coach lawyers for a living. So I had to make some hard decisions about time and travel and income. And I closed down the bookshop on its 1 year anniversary. And it was a hobby farm. I was working for free and I was working, 24/7. I loved it, but it wasn't feasible. And we took a year and we traveled and we tried to do things that we'd always, talked about doing. And I aggressively reread Jane Austen as well. And I watched a lot of TV. I blew through all 22 years of Cheers and Frasier on the elliptical. But I read a lot of Jane Austen. Then I started to read a lot about her. And then my husband went golfing with the guys to Augusta, Georgia. And I'm like, that's great. I'm going to England and I'm going to go to this little village. I'm going to spend a whole week there, just me. And I love you people, but I'm going to go do this. And it really changed my life. I loved my time there. I came back energized and at peace in this very odd way. And I kept reading about Jane. And then my husband was put on some pretty rare and innovative drugs, and his lung decline stabilized. So right now he's healthful. He's able to golf and live a completely full life. And we've bought ourselves time. We have no idea how much. So we have to very much kind of live in the moment. But it gave me hope again, Zibby. Like it just kind of made me feel like you don't know what's around the corner. And there's no point in freezing up and not engaging. So I kept putting myself out there a little bit. I took my daughter to Philadelphia I'm from Canada. I'm in my writer's shed, by the way, like 20 feet from Lake Ontario. I took my daughter to Philadelphia and we went to our first Jane Austen conference, and it was amazing. And I came back and I looked at her one day and I said, I feel like writing again for the first time in years. And I'm going to write about a group of people trying to save an old house because I've been watching a lot of Downton Abbey as
Yeah.
well. And then one day I just looked up and I said, I'm going to write about a group of people that come together to save Jane Austen's house. And I typed the Jane Austen Society and I typed the first paragraph and it's all still there. And it was the most fun I ever had was writing this book. It was so much fun.
Oh my
So
gosh.
that's a story.
What a story. Oh my gosh. Thank you for sharing that.
No problem.
Oh my gosh. How great that you took that diagnosis and like did something. I mean, I feel like it's so easy to just sit in a corner and cry and
I did it first for a long
which is fine.
time.
Which is
Yeah.
fine.
No, I did. And then, what I learned was the value of hope. And that is probably the one thing that I sort of lost faith in was when the doctors tell you, here's what it is, and here are the stats. And people in his family have died from this disease. So we're not being Pollyannish. We're not going, ooh, they're all wrong. Like we know that this is serious, but it's a day-to-day life. And I think what we're all dealing right now, unfortunately, is you have to go hour by hour. You don't know what's around the corner. And there's a great quote by a Persian poet, Rumi, And he says you have to live life as if it's rigged in your favor. And I had been coaching people that, but I'd forgotten it in my own pain. And then one day I was like, you don't know for sure. So just live your hour. And that's what I've been trying to do. So, and I've had a great year. I've had a wonderful time.
Yeah.
So,
oh my gosh. So the hour went pretty well.
yes. Yeah.
How did you sit down and write it? Like in the midst of everything else you were going through? You wrote the first paragraph. It became this amazing book. You had all this information sort of stored up from your travels. And then did it come pouring out? Is that what happened? Or
Yes. And do you know Susie Orman-Schnall, who has the book? Yes. Okay. So she's been like so lovely and supportive to me. And I was watching when Brooke Foster's book came out, Summer Darlings. They were all talking about writing process, and I never knew anyone that had my writing process. But Susie, got on and was like, I take like a year and I research the heck out of something. And then when I finally sit down to write, that's all behind me. And then I'm 8 hours a day. And that's what it's like for me. It's very intensive. And in a way, getting all the research done for historical fiction ahead of time enables you to really be liberated from the facts in the way that will serve the story. So I was able to kind of have it there in the background of my mind, but really focus on the characters and what I wanted to tell about them and their interior lives. So when I do write the first draft, it's intensive because everything's just pouring out. But it worked for me with this one. I mean, Zibby, I have 5 manuscripts in a drawer from like the past 20 years that didn't go anywhere. So, but yeah.
I mean, that's like the classic story, right?
Yes.
And yet when they're your manuscripts, you feel really badly that they're in there. I feel like people used to always give advice like, don't be afraid of rejection, but it's not like that. It should just be like, you have to write 4 bad novels before you have a good one. Like you have to like, just take the time, write the bad novel, tell yourself that like, you think it's great, but it's not. And that your next one will be better, and then move on from there and like, don't even think twice about it.
That's absolutely it, because in a way it's like the 10,000 hours theory of Malcolm Gladwell.
Yes.
Like it's a muscle, and you're learning to exercise it, and you're learning to exercise it at certain times. Like as a working mom, when my daughter was in kindergarten, I would get up from 5 to 7 to write. And I'm sure you're gonna relate to this, right? Because you have 4 times what I have. I have one child. But sorry, do you have 4 children? Did I get that right?
I do.
Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
Yeah.
So my creative subconscious is now trained to kick in at 5 a.m. whether I want it to or not. She's now at university, and I'm still waking up at 5 to write. So a lot of that writing process of the manuscripts that don't get published is the training. It's the marathon. It's the lead up. Mm-hmm. And that's the thing I want people to really take away from my story.
Wow. So this book, how long when it finally finished, you were doing 8-hour days of just it pouring out of you. How long after all the research and all the rest, just wondering how long it ended up taking?
I mean, it was probably a good, couple of months for like that preliminary first draft. But what was really fortunate for me was I landed an agent in New York who was at Curtis Brown at the time. And I'm like, a housewife up in Canada. And I land this agent right away. And he grabbed it. And then we worked on it for months. And he basically didn't take a word out, but he wanted me to flesh out things and, pace it better. Mm-hmm. And so that process was another like 4 months. And then we went on sub. So
wow.
Yeah.
Do you have any regrets about how you handled this, like how you went about this? Like if you had to do it all again, it's because it sounds to me like super inspiring and spot on. Not that there's any way to judge anybody else's life, but you know what I mean? Yeah. Like when you look back, you went through so much heartache and pain and uncertainty, and you chose to pour it into writing.
I don't have a single regret. And I said this to my husband last week, because I theoretically should, but I can't because of where I am this hour and today, So I think regret is an interesting word to me, because it's negative in a way. I think what you need to do is more forgiveness for the fact that at that time in your life, that's how you reacted. And as long as you weren't calculating harm to others, as long as you were just doing your best, you might err, you might miscalculate, but if your intent was good, then I think you have to kind of just say, that's who I was at that time. and I did the best I could. And there's a great documentary about the Eagles, the rock band. They're one of my favorites. And one of the later gentlemen that joined said, you will look back on your life, and in the time, it's a mess. It's a toxic, throwing the TV out the hotel room mess as a rock band. And then you are now our age, and you look back, and it has the arc of a Victorian novel and the sweep of something by like George Eliot. And it was very poetic. And I remember thinking, that's what we're all in, and that's where we're heading. So I'll just keep doing what I've been doing so far and hope it adds up.
Oh my gosh, you're amazing. You're
thank you.
Oh my gosh. No, I mean, like, you can tell. I feel like when people go through shattering experiences, to use Judith's term again, life sort of opens up in totally new ways, and you immediately become like somebody maybe you didn't think you would, but you have this sort of perspective that not everybody has. And I think, like, when I start talking to someone like you who has that, it is very apparent. And I feel like there's so much to be learned and so much beauty in that way of looking at life, because really that's the only way there is to look at life. But so many people, I mean, I think I'm rambling, but this period of time has caused all of us, I think, to stop.
No, absolutely.
And look back. But I don't know, that was a long-winded way of saying just that your perspective is so important. And like, I'm sorry you have to gain that perspective through the bad times.
We always say we would give our left finger, pinky, arm to not have gone through what we went through, even for the perspective, because it is awful. I mean, when you're given that horrible diagnosis, and it's awful. And there's no way to sugarcoat it. But the perspective is the one silver lining. And also, in a very odd way, and Zibby, I think we have just 10 minutes. Is that right?
No, it's okay. Keep going. It's fine.
Okay. So in a very odd way, and I'll get a little emotional talking about this. When my husband was diagnosed and I was reading Jane Austen, something happened to me with my reading of her for the first time in my life. So I had read her since I was a little girl many times. I had gone to the village many times. I had, read about her, lots of books. But this time she was reaching me on a different level. And it was almost as if she had been waiting for my maturity, to catch up to her, to where she was. Because I think she had a hard life. I think she was somebody who was like one of the handful of geniuses in literature up there with Shakespeare. And I think that she, was struggling, with the money and the ill health. And she had chronic illness. I think she was probably far more sick for far longer than she let on to her family. Because I think culturally there was a stoicism. We're a much more open culture. So, at the time, I remember when I was reading her, she was speaking to me on a new level. And then I was like closing this bookshop, and I'm like, why? Like, why did you have me open this bookshop and put all this time and money and labor into it, and give us this diagnosis 4 months later, which sounds self-pitying, but it wasn't adding up for me at all. And now that everyone is going through fear for their loved ones' lungs and uncertainty, and the healthcare workers risk their lives every day, and I feel like I was kind of given this bizarre 4-year head start, and I was able to develop some resilience that now enables me to fully enjoy this publication journey, and enables me to be more present for my family. And that's all a gift from the horrible thing we went through, which is my rambling response to you, if that makes sense.
Well, thank you for matching my own rambling. I feel much better now. Thank you.
You were fine.
I don't think that feeling is self-pity. I think anyone in your shoes would wonder the same thing and be just so angry about it. I mean, anyway, I wouldn't beat yourself up. It sounds like you're in a pretty good place, but you deserved any self-pity, and I think it's just so great. So here's my other question. Why Jane Austen? What is it about her that
it's a really good question.
To you so much? And what is it you see in her that's...
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So I have like 3 or 4 things that happened to me with Jane Austen. So the first one is language. And there's something about her, literally her syntax, the way she does a sentence, the way she does a paragraph, and that zinger at the end of the long paragraph that you don't always get with Henry James, for example. Like you're reading and reading and reading, and then bam, she just gets you. And she just places the words in this way that is very soothing to my mind as I'm reading. So I find her just a very calming authorial voice, basically. I think the second major reason is that she creates these little worlds. Like, people are like, why do they film Jane Austen so much? And I'm like, because there's a lot of characters in there to get right. And you'll never get them all right. So then you'll make another Emma and another Mr. Knightley, but he'll be blonde and a little younger and a little shorter. Like, it's a really interesting how you don't think there's a lot of people in the books, because she talked about 3 or 4 families in a village. That's the essence or the core. But there's a lot of characters, and she's so brilliant at characterization. She sketches them so fast for you. So she doesn't have to spend a lot of time for you to know right away what a Miss Bates is like, or Mrs. Bennet in Pride and Prejudice. So what I love is she creates these little worlds that have so many people we can relate to and that we recognize in ourselves. But they're still different enough from our life that we can go into them and escape from ours, and yet still learn some lessons, which I find really fascinating. So on that level, I find her like a tonic, very purifying. And then finally, my number one reason is I am a sucker for a happy ending. And I am a romantic, and I love that she gives the reader the catharsis. She makes her heroines like really, they really have to work for those happy endings, but they will get them in the end. And I love that about her. I love going into those books knowing that the good guys will win, So.
And is that like your book? Can you give away
yes.
the ending? Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely an escape, and it's definitely, I will say I have an epilogue, and when I was writing it, I just remember being so happy that I could tie off the arcs of these 8 different characters. And I still get emotional if I read the epilogue. I haven't read the whole book since for a while now. I know this is the wrong thing to say on a podcast. You start to kind of hate your book. And what I mean by that is you love your story, but the book itself, it's a year-and-a-half process to publication. So you're kind of like, after a while, you're like, I want to talk about something else. But now that it's out there, this is the most exciting time because people are getting it in the mail. And like friends have pre-ordered it and it's arriving and they're showing me photographs and now it has a life of its own. And now it's like another journey starting. And there's a great quote that there's some amazing Canadian novelists in action right now. And one of them, Sam Bailey, was a great thriller called Women on the Edge. She was telling me, I have these women mentoring me in Facebook and Messenger. There's a bunch of Canadian women authors and I'll just be like, help me. And they all jump in and they give me advice. And Sam said that Karma Brown, another great Canadian writer, had said to her that once the book is published, it's not really yours anymore. And I thought that was such a brilliant way to look at reviews and buzz and PR. And you get emails from people through your website that are not always pleasant, all that part of it that you just learn to accept that the story is mine, but the book is theirs. And I also find, at this stage, that's a really, for me, a liberating lesson, and it enables me as a very new author who did not think 2 years ago that any of this is going to happen to her. It enables me to stay in the moment right now as well.
I love that. What the story is mine, but the book is theirs. That's awesome.
That's like, karma.
Okay, I want to
Karma
write
Brown.
that down. No, I want to. Whatever. It's great. It's great advice. By the way, speaking of Canadian women authors, I don't know if you know Sarah Mlynowski. Do you know her? If not,
No.
Okay, I'm going to put you guys in touch because she's also like rah Canada. She lives in LA now, but anyway, she's the one who actually told me to start a podcast a couple of years ago. And
that's so great.
So, anyway,
wonderful.
Just if you want another new friend or whatever. But.
Sure. No, always. I need all the help I can get right now.
So you're living each hour, as we all in a way are in this pandemic. What is your advice to getting through life right now and in general? And you've already given such amazing advice about the perspective that you have, but advice on writing, but mostly just advice on how to maintain the focus of living in the hour when things get in the way in that hour.
I think a lot of it is I found things were easier if I was completely honest with myself about what I needed at that time. And to be absolutely honest, sometimes that meant saying no to people who wanted to catch up over coffee. Tell me how your husband is. And you'd been on the phone all day with doctors and you didn't want to have that conversation. And I would be like, I'm so sorry. I just don't feel like doing that right now. And the old Natalie would not have done that. But something about paying attention to what I really needed must have given me some kind of buffer or margin, because it's made me now much better at that. I'm now able to give more of myself. So I think there is some sort of subconscious energy conservation that we all have to be mindful right now of. And people are trying to homeschool and they have to make every meal and they're worried about their parents. And there's so much coming at you. And I think being honest with yourself about how much you can handle is probably the number one thing you have to do in order to pace yourself, because clearly we have uncertainty for at least several more weeks, if not months ahead. So I think there's a pacing that needs to take place, and to be gentle and kind and patient with yourself as well. It sounds very self-oriented, but it's like that expression about the mom, putting the oxygen mask on first. And I found that by giving myself that quiet year, immersing myself in Jane Austen and taking the trip that I wanted to take and writing the book, even though I think my daughter was in exams, my husband was in Ireland golfing with his friends. That's when I started to write the book. I wasn't the best time in life to try and write the book, but I made the time for it. And I think that doing my year really gave me now an ability to share more openly, because I'm actually, believe it or not, Zibby, a very private person. I told my husband, I said, don't watch, because I have a feeling that, because Zibby's great, I have a feeling I'm going, blah, blah, blah. You're going to be, I said, just watch it later. So.
You're so funny. Oh my gosh. Are you gonna write another book, or do you feel like that got everything out, or what?
No, I think because I had already written 5 books. I am a writer. I am someone that there's a lot going on here if you haven't gleaned that yet. And at any given time, I have different stories percolating. So I have another historical fiction. I think it's going to be set in New York. I'm very excited about it. But I did write another book that is sort of waiting with my agent, things going on. And it's set in more modern times. But my books, I think, will always be about a group of characters coming together and dealing with history or art or culture or saving something. I like multi-character stories. I love creating a bunch of people and then having them bash up against each other in a room. So that's something I'm excited to do. And I've raised a little writer. I have a daughter heading into third year university, and she just finished, she's not published yet, but she's finished her second novel. And we're just constantly talking right now, which is we've never had that. That's a whole new facet to the mother-daughter relationship, which is really amazing. So.
Oh, that's so nice. That is so special. I feel like even when my daughter writes 3 sentences, I'm like, that's amazing.
No, it is. No, it's amazing. Expression is amazing. And also it's them. It's their own ego, their own creative mind. And that's separate from you. And it's wonderful. Yeah.
And then parting advice on writing.
So with this book, the biggest advice I can give, because people are like, wow, you tried really, I tried really hard for decades to get published. And I think my books were actually pretty good. And I wrote them authentically and from the heart. My biggest advice would be to write the book that you most need to write. And don't worry about what everyone else is doing. Because if it's the book that you most need to write, then it's probably you're the only person that can write that story. And that will give you a little market edge, because it's a pretty crowded field out there. But the other thing too with this book was I said to myself, first I wrote it for me because I wanted to be close to Jane Austen again, but I'd read all the books. I'd reread them. And I was like, how do I see she's, so I was writing this book and I'm like right away in chapter 1, I'm like, oh, I get to stay in Jane Austen's world. I get to talk about her with my characters. So I wrote it for me. I wrote it for my husband. The dedication of my book is for my husband. I wrote it for him. But I remember I said to myself, it has to have more than a snowball's chance in hell of being of interest to somebody else. And that was the hook, I think, with the Jane Austen. And I'm very grateful to her because I know that this is why this is happening. And, I would say to people, it's very important to have something be very authentic, the story you most need to write, but it does have to have that unique kind of hook that immediately will pull people in. So.
Natalie, I am so excited I spoke to you today. I'm
Oh,
so
thank
excited. I
you.
know this went on. This can absolutely be the podcast. If the sound is okay, I'm going to just use
Okay.
it because I was worried with like down here in my basement and all the
I
rest. But
know.
I'm glad that despite this, we can still have such a nice conversation. And
No, it's wonderful.
you're really inspiring, and it's just really great to be connected. So
No,
thanks
thank you
for
so
sharing.
much. Thank you so much for having me on and stay well.
You too. Okay.
Okay, take care.
Okay.
Bye.
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 Bye.